Well, the pretty blue dots in my computer are still spinning around. We'll see when they stop. So, but we'll get started. So I'll officially call the Finance Committee meeting of the City of St. John to order at 4:34. Oh, look, there it is. So maybe now I can see my agenda. Stand by. Well, that's better. Now I look over at this camera. Well, as the black dots are circling, let's get moving. So I'll take a motion to approve the agenda. This will be pretty easy. Councillor Radwin, Councillor Norton, all in favor, aye. Contrary minded, carried. We have minutes from September 28th. If I could have somebody move the minutes. Councillor Norton and then Councillor Radwin. We'll take turns. All in favor? Contrary minded, carried. We've done the agenda. Disclosures of conflict of interest. There's only 3 of us. I hope not. We're good. Okay. Seeing none, we're good. On the consent agenda, there is the St. John Police Force and Public Communications Center 2023 budget and the update on the long-term financial plan. Does any committee members have any questions about either of those 2 items? Councillor Radwin?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm not sure that I have anybody here that can answer my questions. So Chief is not present, right?
Craig Levine is financial support, so he would know a fair amount about the police and PSSC budget. So if you have a question on the budget, you'd probably get an answer there.
Yeah, so I mean, I had a question about expanding, like, let me see. Criminal Investigative Division is up 225K. Let me just see, there was a couple of things that were specific on there. Increased cost of provincial initiatives, e-ticketing and e-court disclosures. Any idea? Can you elaborate on exactly what that means? And the building maintenance increase. I was just kind of curious if you have any details about it.
Sure. I'll see what I can provide you. So through the chair to member of council. So the e-ticketing and that really is driving our new records management system that was approved as part of the 2022 capital budget. So as we move to a new records management system, we're going to incur additional annual costs, and that was highlighted in that budget. There's a lot of pressure on the IT infrastructure, and so that increased cost will also allow us or the police force to start doing e-ticketing, e-justice, which is sort of that direct line to the court. So again, the new records management system is going to be driving a lot of the operating costs, what they have in their 2023 and a little bit more in 2024. And again, it's replacement of a 20-plus-year-old system that doesn't talk to anybody. We're the only agency in all of New Brunswick that has such an old system. We can't talk to other agencies or our court system. So that's really what that's referring to. Hopefully that answers your question.
And the building maintenance
It's just,
increase?
yeah, just general increases in the building. So again, the
Mhm.
city of St. John, Samiri Ameen's group manages that. The city staff manages that, but it's just general overall increases across the board. It may come in lower, hopefully, but it's just general increases, nothing specific, just a general increase across the board for everything to do with running the operation up there in the building.
So Chair, I have a couple of comments. I don't know if you want me to, do you want me to just go ahead or wait or?
Let me just check in with Councilor Noren. Councilor Noren, do you have any questions?
No, no, Mr. Chairman. As with Craig, we've had the opportunity to go through this at a commission level, and so most of my questions and commentary has been heard there. So I'm happy to hear the members' comments and concerns, and where Craig and I can help. I guess shed some light on any of those budgetary concerns. We certainly available.
Okay, thanks. Councilor Redmond, go ahead.
I didn't want to, Councillor Norton, I didn't want to put you on the spot, but I mean, if you have anything that you can shed light on this, I mean, I have a couple other questions. I kind of felt like they were geared more for the chief. One is I'm just kind of wondering what the three biggest barriers are of the police department, which I mean, I think he's probably the best one to answer that. And I'm wondering if he's implemented things within the Ernst & Young report.
Councillor Radwan, I'd get to the first one. I don't speak for the chief, nor do I profess to do so. But our biggest barrier, obviously, is I would say the collective agreement has significant restraints, and I do see Mr. Levine kind of in nonverbal agreement with that. But collective agreements continue to put restraint on the budgets, and where we can gain latitude in some of those collective agreement areas, I think you'll see budget constraints, I guess, be lessened and probably more favorable, at least from a ratepayer's perspective. But some of the budget concerns that you see are certainly reflective as a result of the collective agreement restraints that are already built in there. It's our number one concern.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm with you there, Councillor. I think, so just to kind of give you my comments. So I guess that I'm feeling like we're in a bit of a difficult position, because this is a $28 million ask in the budget, 2.4 million increase over last year. I realize that the collective agreement has been agreed to and also approved by council. However, that does not necessarily mean that it has to be reflected in the budget going up. So it's really difficult, because this is at arm's length with us having a commission. And I don't have any qualms about having a commission. The only problem is the buck doesn't stop at the commission. The buck stops here, right? It stops at council, actually. So that's where I'm kind of struggling, and I'm going to throw something out there just as food for thought today. I think maybe at some point staff have to come back with recommendations on how to make this better. Do we need a commission? But I'll be honest with you, I would love to have the opportunity to ask these questions before approving this budget. I think it's very important for us to understand the challenges that, if the chief is having challenges in the police department. And I also think it's equally important, for example, I think one of the biggest things that was recommended in the Ernst & Young report was to have civilians working in the police department. Has that been enforced? I over and over and over hear that Moncton and Fredericton's getting a 4% increase, so we want it too. Well, Moncton's using civilians for policing, so are we doing it too? So I would love to be able to ask those questions, Chair. So I'll be honest with you, I'd like to see if we could table this till the next finance meeting.
Mr.
Yep,
Chairman, if it's possible, I'm not going to hone in on everything that the member has to say, but Councillor Radwan, as it relates to the Kodiak Regional Police Force and the utilization of civilian members, I think you're starting to see some of some of that mirrored within your St. John Police Force. So one example of that would we've stood up the auxiliary portion of our St. John Police Force. That was one thing that had that was, for lack of a better word, that was decommissioned for a number of years, and the current chief has stood that back up. So just to give, just by way of example, your concern as the utilization of civilian members assisting with some of the operations, yes, that's already taking place, and you're seeing that by way of the auxiliary police force that's come online. That has had a number of applicants, and I would say from a civilian standpoint, certainly has some very keen, qualified, and passionate participants in that piece of the St. John Police Force's line of duty. So that's good to see as well. So I did want to mention that, because it's not that's not a zero-sum game for us. That's been stood back up, and thanks to the chief and his leadership team.
That's great. Thank you.
I'll just check in with staff on, oh, there's a people with their hand. Oh, Commissioner Fudge, I see your hand.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. One of the beauties of our process here is we always provide time through a receive and file process to let council and the community digest information, and we'll come back shortly after with recommendations. So everything this evening, including what is in the budget for the funding for the police services, is a receive and file this evening. We can certainly extend the invitation for the chief to attend. We have another meeting on November 21st, Finance Committee meeting, in just a few weeks, for which we'll come back with a recommendation. We can certainly extend the invitation to the chief to be there and have him on before the operating budget to address any questions or concerns you may have with the budget.
Wonderful. Thank you.
That work for you, Councillor?
I'm good with that.
Awesome. So the motion for consent, CFO Fudge, while I have you, is this a receive and file on those two reports?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So the money will be talked about in the formal budget. Can I get a motion just to receive and file the two items on the consent agenda? Councillor Radwin, Councillor Norton, all in favor, aye. And contrary minded, carried. Item 6.1 on the agenda is the unconditional grant and tax base report, and I'll turn it over to CFO Fudge.
All right, thank you very much. Good afternoon, Chairman Sullivan, members of the Finance Committee. This afternoon, we're going to dedicate our focus to the operating budgets of the general fund and the water utility. But before we jump into the budgets, some context, I believe, is needed to support our budget recommendations in a few weeks with respect to the city's two largest revenue streams, being the property tax revenue for the city and the city's equalization grant. So it's important for the committee and the community, for that matter, to understand the reasons for which we have brought forth the recommendations in this presentation for the city's 2023 property tax rates within the general operating budget. So we'll start with property tax rates. I think this Finance Committee is very well aware that the City of St. John has led the charge on property tax reform for quite some time, with, just to recap, the three most important recommendations being: we're asking that municipalities be allowed to have control over setting property tax classes and setting separate property class tax rates. We've also asked the province vacate the levying of property tax to allow room for municipalities, which would leave the property tax as the exclusive domain for municipalities in New Brunswick, given municipalities' limited ability to generate other sources of revenue. And we've also asked that a review of the Assessment Act and the assessment practices in the province of Brunswick, including zero-rated and exempt properties, be looked at as part of that review. However, you need to go back to 2008, actually, to the report authored by John G. Finn called Building Stronger Local Governments and Regions, where this conversation, I guess, got started, where Mr. Finn published 91 recommendations, including recommendation number 42, that property tax room be made available from the provincial government, and that at the time he was making this recommendation, that the provincial non-residential property tax rate actually be cut by 1/3 to $1.50. Then in 2017, the city of St. John formalized, I guess, its request to the province to vacate the levying of provincial property taxes or provide room to municipalities, and to amend legislation to provide municipalities with control over setting tax classes and rates based on staff's recommendation in a city manager's fair taxation report. And that staff report was supported by a separately commissioned report in 2017 by two tax experts that we hired, Enid Slack and Harry Kitchen. At the time, they had over 30 years of experience in this field. And two excerpts in the report are on the slide, but I think they're worth reading aloud. First, on page 9 of the report, they indicate that the property tax is a good tax for local government, but not necessarily appropriate to pay for the redistributive services provided by the provincial government, such as education and healthcare. The province should gradually get out of levying property taxes. And then on page 53 of the same report, moreover, eliminating the provincial property taxes would reduce the pressure on municipal property tax rate and increase transparency in the property tax system. It would also provide municipalities with needed tax room. Black and Kitchen conducted in that report also an environmental scan on property tax authority, comparing New Brunswick's tax legislation on the setting of tax rates and classes to other provinces in Canada. And what the exhibit on the slide demonstrates is New Brunswick had at the time the most restrictive and controlled tax structure in the country, with only having two tax classes, being residential and non-residential, and then having a fixed mill rate or multiplier of 1.5. If we look at the slide in the structure of other provinces, Alberta, Nova Scotia, PEI, Newfoundland, were free to set their own tax rates without any provincial restriction. And other provinces also had more authority to set tax rates, more authority than in Brunswick, but did have some regulated fairness limits. The slide's also interesting. Slack and Kitchen also benchmark the multipliers across the country, comparing St. John or New Brunswick's fixed multiplier of 1.5 to other comparable cities in Canada that have a unique mix of residential, commercial, industrial, and major industrial classes. And when you look at the commercial multipliers on the slide, the benchmark commercial, industrial, and heavy industrial all exceeded the multiplier fixed in New Brunswick, and in some cases, as you can see on the slide, significantly. For example, under the major large industrial category, you can see in Prince George, BC, their multiplier was up to 6 times. So there was quite a difference between New Brunswick and other parts of the country. We also took a look at a more recent report that was published by the Altus Group, published a study on benchmark commercial multipliers across the country in other major urban cities across Canada. And what they concluded was the average multiplier across Canada in the commercial sector was 2.73. So with that information as a backdrop, we jumped to 2022, where the province introduced legislative changes that provided municipal governments the ability to establish a new heavy industry property classification. Effective for the year 2023, municipalities will have the option to set a property tax multiplier between 1.4 to 1.7 times the residential rate. As I mentioned, it's previously been fixed for a long period of time at 1.5. And that would be applicable for both the non-residential class and a new heavy industrial class. So before looking at this opportunity, we began our analysis by looking at what tax-based growth has been in the non-residential and residential tax classes in St. John. And you can see on the slide, over the last 3 years, the residential tax base has exceeded the tax-based growth of the non-residential class by over 15%. Or in other words, residential tax base growth has increased 2.8 times the tax-based growth of non-residential classes. which means the residential class of customers have contributed incrementally more to St. John's property tax revenue over that period of time. And we only have officially from Service New Brunswick heavy industry assessment for the last 3 years. It's only recently we've been able to receive that information from them. So we were only able to look at the last 2 years on heavy industry, but you can see the residential tax base over the last 2 years has increased significantly more than both the non-residential and heavy industry classes over this period. So in other words, the residential tax class has had a larger proportional tax burden increase over the last couple of years than both the heavy industrial and non-residential classes. Of course, that's associated with the hot residential market. Last slide, I indicate we only have a few years of official tax-based information for heavy industry from Service New Brunswick. However, the city has been estimating with support from our GIS service for years based on the properties that we have knowledge of that are included in the heavy industrial tax class. So if you look at the slide, in 2013, the assessed value of heavy industry exceeded $700 million. And in 2023, the assessment of the same properties is slightly over $500 million. The main difference between 2023 and 2013 is, of course, LNG. LNG was originally assessed at $299 million, but later through a reassessment process with Service New Brunswick, that was reduced to about 1/3 of that assessment, as well as there was some reduction in other industrial properties in 2013 due to various market conditions. We also revisited the Gardner-Pinfold report on heavy industry, which opined that heavy industry provides St. John approximately $12 million in tax revenue. However, it creates $3.7 million in direct costs on roads and emergency fire services, and approximately $32 million in opportunity costs for lost residential property tax assessment due to lower property values closer in the proximity of heavy industrial properties. So just to recap before we jump into this slide, St. John has been consistent with its request for tax reform and that the province should vacate tax rooms so that the city can enter into it to generate its own revenues, which the goal would be to reduce our reliance on the provincial grants as well as to reduce the municipal tax rate in St. John. Our recommendations are supported by the Finn report and tax experts Slack and Kitchen. And we've also seen in this presentation that the tax burden on the residential class over the last 3 years has been significantly incrementally higher than both the non-residential and heavy industry property tax classes. So with that, the province announced in its 2022-2023 budget that beginning in 2022, the provincial property tax rate for non-residential properties will be reduced by 15%, reducing its property tax rate from $2.18 to 2.186 to $1.856, so 1.856, which will free up, based on the calculations on this slide, will free up over $6.7 million in tax room for St. John to enter into. You can see the breakout. So on the non-residential, the difference in the rates for non-residential is about $5 million in tax room, and on heavy industry, it's about $1.7 million in tax room. I'm going to steal some of the thunder from the next presentation, but in our next presentation, the 2023 general operating budget, we will be recommending, eventually it'll be received file this evening, of course, but the draft budget recommends that the city enter the provincial tax room and increase its multiplier from 1.5 to 1.7 for both the non-residential tax class and heavy industrial tax class, and to use all of the additional revenue to reduce the city's property tax rate. We'll be recommending the city reduce its tax rate by 9 cents from $1.71 to $1.62. This aligns with the city's long-term financial plan to reduce the tax rate. It aligns with the fair taxation report and strategy the city has been advocating for years to enter tax room vacated by the province. It aligns strategically with the city's focus to increase residential housing units in the city. And tax rate reduction for residential class is supported by the fact that they've had significant tax-based growth over the last 3 years. More importantly, increasing the multiplier will not increase the tax burden on non-residential property class, as you can see on the slide. By moving the multiplier from 1.5 to 1.7 and reducing the municipal tax rate to $1.62, the city will generate, you'll see in the first row there, approximately $2.9 million in additional property tax revenue. However, with the province announcing this week the plan to accelerate the provincial rate reduction, property tax rate reduction by 15% in 2023, non-residential property class customers will pay approximately $5 million less in provincial property taxes. This is the premise within the Fair Tax Report. Provide the city tax room so that overall taxation does not increase for the customer, but provides more sources of revenue and opportunities for the cities. This slide is the same, but for heavy industry. Increasing the multiplier to 1.7 and reducing the tax rate to 1.62 will allow the city to generate almost $1 million in additional property tax revenue. However, this will be offset for the customer by lower property taxes paid by the heavy industrial class to the province with the 15% reduction in the rate. And that class would pay approximately $1.7 million less in provincial property taxes. Both of these slides illustrate one of the issues with having non-residential class taxes linked or tied to residential rates. The Fair Tax Report published by the city asks for the authority to establish separate rates and separate classes rather than the current system of establishing a residential rate and applying a slider or a multiplier, because you're not able to reduce the residential property tax or sculpt different rates based on different economic conditions within the community. So what does this all mean to the 2023 general operating budget? I know there's a lot of focus on tax rate, but when you look at this slide, you can see even with a reduction in the tax rate to $1.62, the city will still generate additional property tax revenue of over 8% year over year, approximately $10.6 million. The residential class property tax revenue will increase by 6.32%, or $5 million. Non-residential customers or class will increase by 11.09%, and heavy industry will increase by 10.25% due to the increase in the multiplier going from 1.5 to 1.7. However, the tables below show the net impact after the reduction in the provincial property tax rate. So you'll see the non-residential and heavy industrial property tax classes will pay less taxes in 2023, going from 11% increase municipally, but to a negative 2.22% for the non-residential class with the provincial tax room, and negative 2.96% for heavy industry with the 15% reduction in the provincial tax rate. So the recommendation aligns with the city's Fair Tax Report. Province transfer of tax room should be commended as a good starting point for comprehensive tax reform. Provinces vacating 15% to allow municipalities to enter. City fair tax request is 100% to eliminate reliance on provincial grants and reduce the municipal tax rate, such that there is no increased tax burden on the customer. And the Fin report recommends a non-residential provincial tax rate of $1.50 rather than the current $1.86 that's being recommended. Tax room allows the city to generate an additional $4.2 million in taxes from non-residential class and $1.3 million in taxes from heavy industrial class by moving the multiplier, and all the revenue will be used to reduce the tax rate. Non-residential class and heavy industrial class multiplier increases is more than offset by the reduction in the province's 15% reduction in the province's provincial property tax rate. Residential tax rate reduction of $1.71 to $1.62 will still increase residential property tax revenue by 6.32%, which speaks to the need of needing separate classes and separate rates. And the recommendation to reduce residential property tax rate strategically aligns with our focus on having new units in the City of St. John. So before I go into the Equalization and Regional Service Commission grant, I will stop, take questions, but I would make the recommendation that is recommended when we bring back the recommended budget on November 21st, that the Finance Committee endorse moving the non-residential and heavy industrial property tax multipliers from 1.5 to 1.7 for the 2023 operating budget.
Thanks, CFO Fudge. I'll entertain a motion if anybody would like to move that recommendation. Thanks, Councillor Norton. Would you like to second that, Councillor Redwin?
I have a couple comments actually, but I mean, I guess so.
I could put my name in for a seconder.
Yeah.
No, just to get it officially on the floor, and we're into comments and questions, so go ahead.
So I'll be honest with you, I love graphs. So I was all over this report, enjoying it and not enjoying it at the same time. So, you know, this Altus Group property tax benchmarking study, I thought that was a great slide to show. 7 out of 11 municipalities across Canada have at least 2.5 times greater the residential tax rates. And I know that we're talking about, increasing the multiplier here, and I'm fine to recommend that. The one part of this that we're going to get into the discussion about the tax rate, but I'm all for, us being able to reduce our residential tax rate. Our citizens totally deserve it. The one challenge with this is when we're reducing their residential tax rate, because heavy industry is also aligned with getting that same tax rate. We're also giving them a reduction. And then on the other hand, we have this multiplier. So, for me, I want to be able to optimize that tax rate. I think that St. John citizens have been subsidizing for far too long and carrying the burden of, fixing roads with so many heavy trucks going through and all those sort of things, like CFO Fudge mentioned, also having an opportunity cost loss of $32 million worth of revenue in the city. And that is substantial. So, that those are the sort of things that make, and it also gets me kind of thinking, is the value proposition lowering the tax rate to become competitive with Moncton and Fredericton, for example, or is it to giving to more services and looking after capital and offering like our Uniplex, for example, or just looking after our ball fields, whatever it may be. So, I'm not totally sold on our tax rate reduction, and I probably won't be until those tax classes are recognized, and it's really sad because we're feeling pressure that we shouldn't be feeling, because these tax assessments have been so unfair over the years, and they continue to be unfair. So I think we're kind of in a bit of a pickle with this. I'm certainly there for the multiplier, but part of that, just because that the 9-cent rate reduction was in there, I just wanted to mention that. And anyway, that's pretty much, I have lots of thoughts, but I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Councillor Redwin. Welcome, Your Worship. We're just at the end of questions on the unconditional, sorry, not the unconditional grant, but the tax base portion of the presentation.
Thank you.
Before I go to you, City Manager, I do want to check in with the other committee members. Councillor Norton, any questions or comments on the tax base report? Okay. I know you're just joining us, Your Worship. Do you have any questions or comments at this point, or are you going to play a little catch up?
Well, I can play a little bit of catch up, but I did like the report, and I really am very supportive of the recommendation.
Thank you. And just before I go to the City Manager, CFO Fudge, if you could share your screen with the report again. There's 2 slides that I'd like to talk about and perhaps have a question about, and one of them actually is that graph, the Altus Group 2021 property tax benchmarking study. And just, I guess my question really has to do with the 2017 Fair Taxation Report, the Kitchen and Slack report. The city asked for some very specific things with regards to tax room and separate rate classes. And I think, the province, well, the math is showing that the province has given more tax room than we are able to move into at this point. But I guess I would categorize the tax room part as a success, because if we can't move into it all, but they've obviously given us the tax room to move into. And the other piece is, and I would like your opinion, CFO Fudge. I'm actually okay. It's a little bit of math with the slider effect. We need more slider in order to take all the tax room, I think is important. The reason I asked you to put the Altus Group benchmarking study up there is at 1.50, we're not even on the graph, and going to 1.7 puts us third last out of 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 benchmark cities. And the other piece that's, I saw it on another spot, but not on this one, is a lot of our reports that we've had comparing Sault Ste. Marie and us seem to be fairly close. And I think if memory serves, thanks. Yeah. So they're ranging 2.14 to 5.26 multiplier, and we are maxing out at 1.7. In my opinion, if the province said the multiplier is the way to do it, and we are willing to listen to you on more tax classes without the cap on the multiplier, that would let us move into that tax room, and that would let us, because one of the problems, and Councillor Radwin was right on, even with the tax rate reduction, our residential contributors are still 6.3%, while because of the tax room that we can't move into yet, while our non-residential taxpayers are in a year of crazy inflation actually going to be paying less. That's a whole lot of me talking, but the base question is, we have a current system that the provincial government has put in place that I think is a start. But if they took the cap off that slider and had conversations with us about more classes, do you think that would fit the spirit and allow us to do what we want to do from Kitchener and Slack? It's just a different means, but would that get us there?
Yeah, I think it's an opportunity to improve upon what we have currently, and what we have currently has been a big improvement from what we had in the past. I will remind the committee that one of the driving motivations behind the Fair Tax Report back in 2017 was for the city to become less vulnerable. And we recognized that to become less vulnerable, we had to control our own revenue streams. And we didn't want to have, you'll notice in your own long-term financial plan, and I know it seems sort of odd, but when we have lower unconditional grant, we rely less on a grant, it's actually a positive indicator in our financial plan because it means you're less vulnerable. So we talked about at the time that, in St. John, provincial property tax revenue was somewhere in the order of $46 million that was collected by the province, and we received a $17, $18 million grant back. What the premise was, we don't want the grant. We want control of our own revenue streams, and then we want to be able to use our revenues for improving service delivery and also reducing the tax burden on the community, and leave that property taxes exclusive domain for cities. That was the premise. It wasn't ever premised on let's increase taxes on customers or on the community. It was about sustainability, control, growth, those sort of principles in the plan. So I think we're moving in the right direction, but there's more conversation to be had.
Okay, thank you. And I think, our success, I think part of our success has come from us following longer and longer term plans, long-term financial plan, strategic plan, 2-year capital budgets, all those things. I think that's been part of our success. So, and aside from tonight's actual operating budget, but I think maybe the next part of the conversation, because part of the question and concern in the community that we've had is we've asked for comprehensive tax reform. And while the province didn't come down with an omnibus bill that put all of the comprehensive tax reform in place. There are bits and pieces that are here. We've asked for tax room. There is tax room. I do want to come back to that concept in a moment. And we've asked for separate classes. They've given us a couple, but we would like more, but at least they've opened the conversation to separate classes. And while we asked to be able to do separate tax rates in each class, the slider lets us really do that, except, and this is where we need to go to the 2023 general operating budget property tax increase per class slide. But in us moving the sliders to 1.7 in combination with, if you can find that one, Kevin, in combination with the provincial tax room, which we're talking about a lot of jargon that we're familiar with for people who are just tuning in because they want to hear about their tax rate. What the tax room means is non-residential property tax payers pay two property taxes. They pay one property tax that goes to the province. They pay a property tax that comes to the municipality. And the province has reduced their portion. So these folks are paying less to the province to allow municipalities to have them pay that to the municipality. So it is a bit of tax fairness, except it's not the multiplier slide. It's the one that's got St. John municipal property tax increase, non-residential tax increase, and heavy industrial tax increase. Nope, keep going. It's got three graphs on a percent change. It shows the negative 2.22, the negative 2.96. That's it. Yeah, so, you know, after the tax room, like, unfortunately, I think the province, you gave us 1.7. I don't know if it was their intention to give non-residential and heavy tax, or sorry, heavy industry taxpayers a reduction like that. The reduction really, it's tough on me in this time where everybody's in inflation and we're looking at, you know, our residential class is still going to get 6.32% under this plan of an increase. But it's the only mechanism we have. Like if we don't, you know, just Councillor Radwin, following up on your point, if we don't reduce the tax rate by 9 cents, the non-residential and heavy industry do pay more, but so does the residential class, you know, and so I guess I agree with the recommendation to go to 1.7, and I will be agreeing, well, even though it's a receive and file, I think following our plan, dropping the tax rate 9 cents makes sense. My lament is this: if we had more of a slider to take all of that tax room, which we don't, then we could actually reduce the tax rate more and reduce the burden even more on our residential class. So we have what we have. These are the rules we have for this year's budget. So I think because these are the rules we have for this year's budget, staff has done a very good job at bringing the best of what we can have under the rules we have now. But I think the other piece that's important, and I hope will help feed the discussion, now that we've got a year of this, we've got actual data and numbers to use to continue the conversation with the province. You know, this slide in and of itself, I'm quite sure, you know, when I talk to provincial politicians and show them this slide, I think it'd be very powerful to say, thank you, you gave us the tax room, you gave us the sliders, you gave us tax classes. Here's what it means in reality. Our residents are still paying 6.3% more, while non-residents are getting a tax break. can we continue the conversation? So that's really what all my babbling was about. But I really appreciate the numbers, and I think the explanation was very good because it will help the further conversations that are to come. Sorry, Mr. City Manager, I put you off for a bit.
No worries, Mr. Chair. At the risk of flogging a dead horse, I do think I want to re-emphasize one point. We as staff always recognize every year that there is a debate about which should we do more of, reduce the tax rate to improve our competitiveness, or pay ourselves in terms of providing additional services, etc. That debate will continue in subsequent years as well, to be sure. Certainly it is the staff's perspective that by lowering the tax rate, you do improve competitiveness, but how much? In this particular year, what has driven the recommendation to reduce the tax rate by 9 cents, which is a very significant reduction to the tax rate, and I get it that many councillors and members of the public may argue that some of that should instead go towards enhancement of services. I think the important point to remember is even with a 9-cent reduction in the tax rate, the average residential customer will still pay more tax this coming year than they have last year. And that's why we have been so aggressive on that reduction in the tax rate, in order to recognize that our residential class is paying more and we want to minimize how much more they pay. In addition to the other arguments about being competitive, making sure we have the services provided, etc. Thank you.
Yeah, no, appreciate it. So we do have the recommendation on the floor to move the sliders on non-residential and heavy industrial property tax from 1.5 to 1.7. And if there are no further questions or comments, I will call the question. Okay, call. Councillor Radwin, comment or question? Oh, you're just ready for the question.
Yeah, I'm just good to move the recommendation.
Okay, did we have it moved?
It's moved and seconded, yes.
Okay, thank you. So on the question, all in favor, aye or wave? Awesome. Me too. So no contrary minded, passed unanimously. Thanks. Good, robust discussion. CFO Fudge, to you for part 2.
Thank you very much. Now we jump into the core funding and equalization grant, the second largest revenue stream on your budget. So I just want to quickly summarize the events leading up to the province's recent change in the equalization grant. November 2021, the province released a white paper with the intention of creating a new equalization formula, indicating the old formula was not conducive to the needs of a new local governance structure. Then in May 2022, an expert panel was struck, and consultation started in the summer of 2022 with local governments, local service districts, and rural associations. And then in September 2022, and I think the report's included in your kit, an expert panel submitted the recommendations to the province on a formula. And then in October this month, I guess, the province moved with the act respecting community funding with a proposed formula. So the expert panel was tasked with identifying, assessing, and proposing options related to a new system of fiscal transfers between the province and New Brunswick and local government entities. The report was written by former provincial civil servant Nora Kelly and Pierre Marcel Desjardins, a University of Moncton professor with expertise in economics and local government. It was a 21-page report. Again, it's included in the kit. And the recommendation was on a new formula, a recommendation to eliminate core funding in the formula itself, the core funding component, sorry, and a recommendation that the formula should be indexed to provincial tax-based growth. So this was the formula that was recommended in the report. Number one, it said to compare the average tax base per capita in your group, in your municipal group, versus the average tax base per capita. So in our group, it's St. John, Moncton, Fredericton. Number two, measure the dollar value of the gap to measure the equalization that the municipality should receive. So the formula being the gap times population times the average tax rate of the group divided by 100. And then if the municipality's own tax rate is below the group average, the municipality's tax rate should be used in the above calculation. So we took a look at what that calculation would have looked like. We looked at St. John, Moncton, and Fredericton. You can see the tax bases for each community, 8.3 billion for St. John. This is, of course, is before our proposed budget. This is using our current tax rate. Don't want to be presumptuous. Moncton's tax base of 11.4 billion, Fredericton's 10.1. It also assumes a 1.5 multiplier because we don't want to be presumptuous. Then the population, and you get your tax base per capita. So you'll see the averages on tax base per capita and the averages for the tax rate. The average tax base per capita is 141,339, and the city's tax base per capita is 119,645. And then when you look at the tax rate, the average tax rate, which doesn't have a significant impact on the formula, but the average tax rate is $1.55. So when you look at the gap, 141,000 and change, which is the average, minus the St. John number of 119, that's how you calculate your gap of 21,694. We apply it to our population of 69,000 people. We use the average tax rate in the group of 1.55, and you calculate a $23.5 million equalization grant. Now, this is not what we would have received in year one. As you recall, the recommendations of consultants was to phase the formula over a 5-year period. So only 20% of this new formula would have been in effect. But it certainly is a significant difference with respect to what was ultimately proposed by the province. So other expert panel recommendations, they also commented on other things that are of interest to municipalities outside of the formula. They did indicate that the initial budget for the equalization formula should be fully funded by the province. They also indicated that new services mandated in the Regional Service Commission should be funded 50-50 by the provincial government and the municipalities through providing more property tax room transfer. They also aligned with the call to look at property assessment practices in the province. But then they did a little bit of a sneak peek for phase 2 of comprehensive tax reform. Interesting enough, they did indicate their view was municipalities need more sources of revenue given the downloading of new service mandates to the regional service commissions and the new areas that municipalities are entering into. They also recommended that other revenue generating opportunities should be explored, and they benchmarked some of the mechanisms utilized in other municipalities across the country and other areas. They recommend exploring more property tax room than we currently have, indicated that they should be explored and that certainly more sources of revenue are merited for municipalities. So the actual provincial recommendation for a formula used the 2022 tax base equalization formula. So they used the equalization formula from last year as the base, which doesn't reflect any of the, I guess, the tax base growth or any of the changes for 2023. They also added a formula that the base equalization would be adjusted if your growth rate exceeded 3%. So in our case, our growth rate was 8.76%. So it would have enacted a downward adjustment of 5.76% to the equalization component of the formula based on this adjustment, but anything over 3%. They also, consistent with the recommendations of the consultants, recommended eliminating core funding over a 5-year period. They recommended reallocating core funding to regional service commissions, and that for 1 year only, regional service commission grant would be provided to municipalities in 2023 to offset the cost of the regional service commissions, and as well to mitigate some of the loss from the equalization grants. 2024 and beyond, the rest of the core funding program will be transferred to a provincial designated fund that will make use of the funds available for RSCs or regional service commissions, and that will be done through application to cover costs of projects related to the regional strategies for each of those regional service commissions. And the equalization budget provincially would be frozen at $75.6 million for 5 years. So one of the things we looked at was, and as you're familiar with in our operating budget policy, we really want to understand what's one-time money versus reoccurring revenue. And where this is being phased in over a 5-year period, they had to do some math to sort of figure that out. So in 2023, you can see that we've lost the first part of the core funding program, given 80% of the old formula is still in play. So we are going to receive $15.8 million between these three grants: core funding, equalization, and regional service commission grant. 2022, we of course only had the core funding and equalization for $16.6 million. So overall, when you add up the additions and subtractions, the budget in 2023 is lower for these three items by approximately $780,000. When you look to the future and understand that the core funding component is going to be eliminated and transferred to the regional service commissions as an opportunity to apply for cost. And I'm talking about direct municipal funding. So there's obviously going to be opportunities to leverage the benefit of having these funds at a regional service commission level to offset some costs for municipalities, but I'm only looking at direct municipal funding. By 2027, if you applied the formula, our equalization, as you see, I'm assuming is going to be the same, $13.2 million. The core funding goes away and the regional service commission grant goes away. So that's a $3.4 million reduction at the end of the 5-year term. So what we're suggesting as part of our recommendations later is that we really should be not creating budgets based on recurring revenue of $15.8 million, but that we're going to be moving much of this revenue, $2.5 million of this revenue is really one-time revenue for all intents and purposes based on where we're moving with the formula. So regional service commissions will be able to apply for funding to reduce municipal costs for projects. That includes economic development, tourism, regional sport, recreational, cultural infrastructure planning, cost sharing, regional policing collaboration, regional emergency measures planning, and solid waste management. So obviously there are opportunities to reduce cost and leverage that funding. But the next slide I really want to show really the core funding program in the old grant equalization core funding grant program was, the core funding was based on 16 cents times the non-residential tax base. So when you looked at the core funding in 2022 that each of the communities in our region would have received that make up the RSC, obviously St. John has a large non-residential tax base, and the other communities and towns don't have very large non-residential tax bases, they're predominantly residential. So 89% of the core funding was St. John at 2.8 million, 2.9 million for the total core funding in the region, 2.5, 2.6 for St. John, so 89%. By transferring and allocating core funding to the Regional Service Commission, it will be done by population tax base growth, or tax base, sorry. And St. John will receive an opportunity to benefit if we are leveraging these grants and using it to reduce cost, 57%, our proportional share. Rothsay at 11, Quispam says 15. So you'll see there is a difference in the benefit level percentage-wise from what was in the old formula versus the new opportunity to leverage RSC grants. And when you look at the difference, we take the same amount of money, $2.8 million, and you allocate it based on the Regional Service Commission funding percentages. You'll see St. John at 2.5, 2.6 million in the old system would benefit about 1.6 million if we were to leverage all that to reduce cost in the city proper. So a reduction in benefit of about $930,000, whereas all the other cities that have, or towns, sorry, that have traditionally had low core funding percentages because of the lack of non-residential tax base, but with a higher population tax base to participate in the RSC funding percentages, will benefit from this new structure. So in conclusion, the expert panel equalization formula based on fiscal capacity would have benefited St. John. The expert panel recommendations on phase 2 tax reform is good for all municipalities in New Brunswick. Provincial equalization recommendation is based on an old formula and 2022 tax bases and economic factors. It doesn't reflect the updated 2023 differences in fiscal capacity. The provincial equalization adjustment for growth over 3%, I don't know what that's based on. The transfer of core funding to regional service commissions reduces the benefit to St. John, but improves the benefit for other municipalities in the region. And until core funding is phased out in 2027, St. John should treat core funding payments as one-time payments pursuant to the operating budget policy and not relied upon to fund annual recurring operating costs. So the recommendation is that Common Council draft a letter to the province in support of the expert panel recommendations. And second, that the provincial core funding grant revenues be treated as one-time revenue in the general operating budget until such time as the core funding grant is phased out in 2027. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions the committee may have. You're on mute, Chair.
Thanks. That's one. Questions and comments from the committee? Guess I'll start there. Seeing none. Councillor Redmond.
Sorry, thanks, Chair. I was hoping, I thought I saw Donna's mayor's light off or mute button off, so I thought she was going to speak. So I'm just wondering, CFO Fudge, if this recommendation is also supporting us not being able to keep our hotel levy in any way.
No, this has nothing to do.
It didn't look like it to me, but I just wanted to make sure.
No, this is strictly the formula that's been created for the equalization grant to municipalities.
Okay. Yeah, I thought so. I just wanted to verify. Thank you.
Your worship.
I just wanted to move the recommendation.
Okay, seconder. Thank you, Councillor Radwin. Any other questions or comments from committee? CFO Fudge, a couple of questions. So one, treating provincial core funding as a one-time revenue, what does that mean in practicality for our budget? Does that mean one-time revenue, we would use it as part of our pay-as-you-go capital, or, oh, good.
Absolutely, yeah. So for instance, an appropriate use of that funding would be, Common Council has adopted a strategy to fund comprehensive recreation arts facility. That would be an excellent source of funding to do that, because it's one-time funding. We can put it into a capital reserve. It was up to $3 million, the resolution, so this could be part of a strategy to help fund that facility. So we would look for opportunities like that to leverage that money, knowing that money is going to go away in 2027. We don't want to create ourselves a structural deficit in 2027 by relying on those funds for service delivery when we know it's going to go away in a few years.
Thank you. No, very wise. And as we move into the budget next, so if we are treating this provincial core funding as one-time monies now, is that part of our, would that be seen as a reduction in our revenue in the operating budget? Or just another section of the operating budget?
No, so what you'll see in the operating budget, it will come in as revenue, but you'll see an expenditure for whether it's a reserve or capital from operating on the expense side to offset it.
Thank you. And my last comment or question, and really has not to do with this side, but the first half of this presentation, as I continue to think, certainly I'm in favor with Finance Committee recommending to Common Council to draft a letter to the province in support of the expert panel recommendations. Would we be too premature at this point in time, whether it be to tag that in that letter or a separate letter with regards to opening up the top end of the slider now that we have the data? Or do you suggest we put that off to a conversation for another day? Hi, City Manager.
Hello, Chair. I would actually suggest that they be two separate letters. They are very distinct issues. They both have to do with revenue, but one is property tax revenue, the other one is grant revenue. So because they are so distinct, I would suggest two different letters with arguments for that apply to each within those letters.
No, I think so, and good advice. But I don't see anybody saying that it's not a good idea not to send them a letter on that. So, might I suggest we add to the recommendation that Finance Committee recommend that Common Council draft a letter to the province thanking them for the current changes, but now we have a specific ask with regards to property tax reform, and that would be opening up the top end of the slider from 1.7 to, I'll say whatever really the municipality thinks is appropriate. I'm sure the province will come back with a cap of some sort, but I think that's where it should be. Councillor Norton?
Yeah,
You're good?
I just want to, yes, absolutely.
Good with that? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic.
Councillor Radno. Okay, thank you. Any comments or questions? All right, well, I'll take the vote. All in favor, aye. Contrary minded? Carried. Thanks, team. Moving on to 6.2, the 2023 General Fund Operating Budget. CFO Fudge.
Second, please. All right, thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity to walk the Finance Committee through the very first draft of the proposed 2023 general operating budget. Again, no decisions will be made this evening. This is simply a receive and file. We will return on November 21st after receiving feedback from the Finance Committee and any other feedback we receive through the chair. We will endeavor to answer all questions and consider all information with recommendation, and we will highlight any adjustments made based on the feedback we receive when we come back on the 21st. We will then ask the Finance Committee on the 21st to endorse bringing the budget to Common Council on November 28th, and that would also be a receive and file, and then ultimately a recommendation of approval on December 12th, Common Council. So the recommended 2023 general operating budget is funded at $176,439,982. That's up 7.1%, or $11.7 million in additional spending over the 2022 operating budget. The increase in the budget is funded primarily through property taxes at $10.6 million in higher property taxes revenue than it was in previous year. Property tax revenue is up 8%, driven by entering the provincial tax room and driven by the 8.76% tax base growth the city received in 2023. We are, as we already discussed, proposing a reduction in the city's property tax rate of 9 cents, moving from $1.71 to $1.62 per $100 of assessment, and an increase in the multiplier from 1.5 to 1.7. If approved, the city would have reduced its tax rate over the last 2 years by 16.5 cents, or by over 9%. However, it's very important to differentiate tax rate from tax burden. I think we've had that conversation a little bit this evening already. Even though the tax rate is significantly lower, as we've pointed out here, property tax revenue is up 8% year over year, and that needs to be considered as the taxpayer is paying the property tax revenue in the city's operating budget. The second largest revenue stream for the city, the equalization grant, is reduced by approximately $1.3 million based on the new provincial funding formula, as we just discussed. But that's offset by a one-time Regional Service Commission grant of $586,000. Excuse me. And we are recommending the core funding component of this grant be treated as a one-time revenue, as we just discussed. The budget is a product of a collaborative effort from all service areas, which are represented this afternoon and are available to answer any questions that the committee may have. Also guided by the city's recently approved 10-year strategic plan. 1 cent in the reduction in the tax rate is attributed to the St. John Energy benefit that the city will receive from participating in the St. John Energy's growth agenda. The draft budget of the Regional Service Commission has been fully provisioned in this budget. And finally, the 2023 proposed general operating budget meets and in many cases exceeds performance management standards contained in the long-term financial plan, which we'll touch upon later in the presentation. This is a high-level summary of the overall draft 2023 budget compared to 2022. First thing you can see at the bottom of the slide is the budget is balanced. This is a legislative requirement for all municipalities in New Brunswick. And I'll just quickly go through each item, and then we'll jump into the services in the later slides. But under revenue, property tax and unconditional grant represents 89% of the overall budget, overall revenue in the budget. As we mentioned, property tax revenue is 10.6 million increase, or 8% increase, driven by tax-based growth of 8.76%. Equalization grant being down 1.3 million, or 8%, offset by the Regional Service Commission one-time grant. Own source revenue is up approximately 1.4 million, or 9.9%, due to significant increases in the accommodation levy. So the accommodation levy, for the purposes of this budget, is a revenue and an expense. It comes in as a revenue, and it's higher this year due to the fact that now hotels are recovering to pre-pandemic levels with pent-up demand. So that's driving that revenue stream, own source revenue. Also, we have higher interest revenue due to increased interest rates on our cash held in our city's GIC and the city's bank accounts. So that's generating additional interest revenue, which is also one of the reasons why own source revenue is up. We talked about St. John Energy benefits. You can see that there on the revenue side of approximately $1 million. And finally, one of the main differences year over year is we're not anticipating needing to draw any operating reserves in 2023 to fund the budget, as was the case in 2022, which was part of the city's strategy to mitigate the financial impacts of COVID-19. On the expense side, growth and community development, an increase of approximately $1.4 million, or 8.5% year over year. And this is the budget that includes higher accommodation levies compared to last year. And that's in a service agreement with Envision St. John, for which those are transferred. It includes the wage escalation for the current establishment. It includes 2 new FTEs in community development, temporary staffing for community programming, and new costs associated with the Regional Service Commission. Public Works is up 2.2 million, or 5.6%. Which includes wage escalation as well as reinstatement of service levels and additional funding to action the transit transformation project, as well as inflation for fuel, salt, and asphalt. We'll talk about the service levels in another slide. Public safety services this includes police, fire, and the PSCC, or 911. That's up 3.4 million, or approximately 5.9%. Again, wage escalation, and also investments in records management and information technology. Utilities infrastructure services is up approximately 5.6%, with a new FTE in engineering to support the capital program, as well as investment in the outflow inspection program. Strategic services is up 600,000, or 8%, due to wage escalation, increase in liability insurance, additional resources to increase internal audit service, which is driven by return on investment and business case. Increase in Service New Brunswick assessment charge due to higher tax-based growth. We pay more fees to Service New Brunswick. It's based on the assessment. And increases associated with our IT system, including licensing and consumption charges related to cloud and security services. Corporate services is increasing by 351,000, or approximately 5%, which includes funding for a 10-year HR strategy and funding for outside legal counsel to support the implementation of the strategic plan. Finally, other charges. This is where your principal, your debt, your interest is, but the increase, is primarily associated with the funding strategy for the city's future comprehensive recreation and arts facility. So this is where $3 million has been placed in the capital budget reserve for that project. That's basically the full reason why that amount has increased. So the next three slides provide a service lens on how this draft budget aligns with council's strategic priorities and the 10-year strategic plan. First and foremost, reinstatement of service levels with respect to cutting grass, additional funding to mow various medians and other areas throughout the city. There's funding to maintain the new public area at Funding Key. There's additional funding for transit service transformation. I mentioned budget for professional services. Professional services includes legal work for the strategic plan, 10-year HR strategy, employment's performance system, a North End neighborhood plan, a city market strategic plan, recreation subsidization review, a parking study, and development of the community energy action plan, net zero pathway. Also, additional staffing for community services, including two full-time equivalent positions to support recreation, community development, and social inclusion is in the budget. Additional temporary staffing to support enhanced recreational programming, playground supervisors, special events, summer support staff. Funding for 5 new recreational programs, including cost of 2 all-terrain wheelchair and reinstatement of Passport to Parks is in the budget. Significant contribution towards reserves to fund the recreation facility, which spoke to. Funding to support civic commemoration and abilities advisory committee. And affordable housing funding. This would include contract staffing and resources to support the implementation of the Affordable Housing Action Plan. There's funding for additional temporary staffing to support city market strategic plan and night market. There's additional full-time resource to increase the ability to support traffic enhancements, active transportation, as well as design and construction management of capital projects. There's continued investment in IT security, infrastructure, public safety, records management systems, employee recognition program, expansion of the internal audit program and risk management, professional development funds for mayor and council, and funding for urban stormwater outfall inspections. So I just want to stop and reflect on this slide just for a few minutes. So for those who may be concerned that reducing the tax rate from $1.71 to $1.62 will come at the expense of investing in critical city services and priorities, this slide illustrates that is not the case. In fact, the operating budget is increasing year over year. Between 2023 and 2022, the budget's increasing more than it did between 2013 to 2021. And the 2023 general operating budget exceeds the budget that was restructured in 2020. So we're now sitting at $176 million in change in an operating budget in 2023. The budget we had to restructure 2 years ago was only $166 million. That was restructured down to $157 million. So over a 1-year budget cycle, it's a significant increase in investment in the community of over $10 million in the general operating budget. It's also important to note that the budgets for 2018 to 2020 were balanced through short-term provincial support. And if you remove provincial short-term support, the budget 2013 was $147.9 million, and 8 years later in 2021, it was $157.3 million, an increase of $10 million over 8 years. So what is being proposed for 2023 is an increase of $10 million in the budget year over year, and with speculation of a looming recession, inflationary pressures in the current economic environment, a volatile tax-based growth, we're recommending we continue to proceed cautiously to ensure that the city remains sustainable, has the utmost flexibility to pivot or react to changing economic pressures, and we continue to limit risk and financial vulnerabilities for the city. So over a 10-year period from 2013 to 2023, the last 2 years have been significant outliers with respect to tax-based growth, with 8.76% this year, 6.24% previous year. But with 8 years in that trajectory, having less than 2% tax base growth. But looking at the city's overall tax base growth of 8.76%, although it is a significant increase for the city, St. John is still tracking below the provincial average of 10.73% and below the growth rates of our key benchmark cities and towns. See on the slide. On residential tax base growth, St. John is performing quite well, meeting or exceeding the tax base in the region and at a comparable level to the residential tax base growth in Fredericton. When looking at the non-residential tax base growth, St. John appears to be significantly below the tax base growth numbers achieved in Fredericton and Moncton. St. John having 3.26% growth, followed by Fredericton at 10.2% and Moncton at 9.55%. The towns aren't included on the slide because the non-residential tax base is insignificant in the towns relative to cities, and providing those growth rates would really be misleading to use as benchmarks on the slide. Finally, when comparing St. John to Moncton and Fredericton on new construction, St. John is trailing the performance in the two other large urban centers with 1.35% new construction. That represents $96 million in new build. 2.04% in Fredericton, which represents $167.3 million in new construction, and 3.31% in Moncton, which represents $294 million in new construction. Just for the committee's information, the provincial average is 2.2%, and for the province, that represents $1.6 billion in new construction. You can see on the slide the major contributor to the structural deficit in the years 2018 to 2020 was the fact that the tax base growth in blue was less than the annual expenditures in red. When that blue line exceeds the red line of approximately 3%, that's when we have an opportunity, when it exceeds it, sorry, that's when we have an opportunity to reduce tax rates or look at increasing service levels for the community. But that tax-based growth has to be sustainable, and we always need to focus on avoiding future structural deficits. This slide is just a calculation of the overall property tax revenue. The tax base that you see there includes the multiplier of 1.7 in 2023 and the proposed tax rate of $1.62. Wage escalation policy for 2023 is 5.35%. The 2023 increase in wages and benefits follows the policy, so we're in compliance. The wage escalation limit is not just for wage increases. The purpose of the wage escalation policy is to make sure the wage and benefit budgets do not exceed what is affordable. So that means the wage and benefit budgets must also absorb any new positions, new overtime added into the budget, any increases in fringe benefits or fluctuations in fringe benefits, actuarial changes in fringe benefits. So all of this must be covered within the wage escalation limit or ceiling. And also the wage escalation policy has a limit of CPI +1. So this is another high-level snapshot on how the budget is spent. So 11.7 million increase in the budget from 2022 to 2023, 7.1% increase. Wages and benefits, 4.69 million. Again, that includes additional FTEs. Goods and services, 6.18% or 2.55 million. This is obviously, we're in an inflationary environment. Increases in fuel, insurance, repairs and maintenance, the assessment charge. Grants to ABCs at 1.46 million. This includes the increase in transit subsidy for the transit transformation, additional costs associated with the Regional Service Commission, and the fact that we're now transferring more accommodation levies than we have in the prior year due to just the state of the economy. Fiscal charges, 3 million or 13.36% higher based on the financial plan, as well as the recreational funding for the facility. So the draft 2023 budget balances the need to invest in council's priorities with the tax burden of the community in mind. It balances responsible spending based on sustainable growth with delivering value for money to citizens and it balances leveraging tax-based growth to fund service delivery in a strategic way that does not place risk on the organization of falling into future structural deficits. We recommend proceeding with caution given the volatility in tax-based growth, inflation, interest rates, and supply chain issues. This slide is a visual cautionary tale. The years 2009 and 2023 almost mirror each other on this slide with respect to tax-based growth. And yet the city entered into a significant period of structural deficit beyond 2009 due to stagnant growth and various recessionary periods. And now we're here today talking about potential recessionary periods in 2023 and beyond. The city averaged 0.5% growth per year between 2014 and 2019, and we know the rest of the story. So we need to create budgets and financial plans, not only for today, but also for tomorrow. We also must be competitive. In gray, you can see the 2022 tax rate for St. John and comparator communities. And in blue, you can see the proposed 2023 tax rate for St. John. And this slide will be updated once we start hearing about the tax rates in other communities. We are well on track to meeting the tax rate set out in the long-term financial plan of $1.57. Of course, that plan needs updating based on significant changes in economic conditions and assumptions. The proposed tax rate closes the competitive gap between St. John and outlying communities and other large urban centers. It aligns with Council's priority to increase the number of housing units in St. John with a lower tax rate for new construction in the residential market, which includes not only homes and homeowners, but apartment buildings. More quality housing stock supports the city's goal to achieve population growth of 85,000 in the recently approved 10-year strategic plan. And the loss of the stigma attached to having one of the highest tax rates in the province reinforces a stronger brand for the city of St. John. The main point of this slide is just to reinforce that 85% of the tax base growth in 2023 is from market adjustment. And as we saw in the previous slides, continued market adjustments at that level is not likely to continue. So we need to remain cautious. We discussed the multiplier extensively in the first presentation, so I'm not going to go over that again. We need to also be cognizant of the inflationary pressures facing the community. Not only is it important to be competitive, but we also need to place a lens on St. John taxpayers and strive to minimize the cost of service and the municipal property tax burden on the community. There's a number of metrics on there with respect to inflation. We recommend we continue to follow the long-term financial plan, a plan that will be updated in Q1 2023. Fundamental in the plan is continued focus on reducing our price, reducing our debt, so that we can redirect interest costs to service delivery and do not expose the city to rising interest rates. We remain sustainable. We provide more funding for growth and continue to fund reserves and capital from operating for rainy days to address the infrastructure deficit and to remain flexible. So advantages of tax rate reduction versus spend, mitigate taxpayer burden from assessment increase. We stay competitive with other municipalities, provides flexibility in event that you need to increase your tax rate in future years. We can still be on track with the long-term financial plan and have that flexibility to move tax rate. When you're at the upper end of the tax rate, you don't have as much flexibility. Strategic, it provides time to see if growth is sustainable. And risk management, increasing cost of government is risky if growth is not sustainable. Reducing costs is far more disruptive, as we've seen in the recent past. So with respect to council priorities for growth, local immigration partnerships, succeed and stay, affordable housing neighborhoods, building incentives, and urban development incentives. Additional funding for growth and community services is in this budget. With respect to green, virtual benefits, St. John Energy, clean energy benefits, full implementation of curbside recycling, opportunities to green fleet with replacement program, affordable housing in neighborhoods is in this budget for Belong, as well as additional funding for various community services, recreational programming, and budget to sustain road network, traffic engineering, and safety, additional funding for St. John Transit. Finally, on key performance indicators and our performance metrics, you can see we're tracking quite well. General fund long-term debt, 2014 was $119 million. We are now in 2023 at $86 million, and we continue to improve on that position. Total debt to the operating budget percentage. So it's essentially that you take your total debt, you divide it by your operating budget. We want to see that percentage drop, and it's dropping. 64%. Debt represents 64% of the total operating budget in 2019, and we are now at 49%. Target is 50% by 2030. We've already exceeded the target. We had a target debt service ratio of 9% by 2030. We're at 8.9% in 2023. We're already exceeding the target. And we're well on our way of meeting our target of debt per capita. So debt per capita, and this is what basically is our debt divided by our population. So everyone's percentage debt in the city of St. John was $1,524 per capita back in 2019. We are now at 1,233. We had a target of 1,175 by 2030. We're well on track of meeting that target. And then tax rate, it was $1.78.5. We made a significant decrease in 2022 to $1.71, and now we're at $1.62 with this recommendation. And pay-as-you-go contribution. The target in the long-term financial plan is by 2030. The pay-as-you-go would meet $12 million. Essentially, renewal would be covered by pay-as-you-go, and any new debt would be covering new investments or new infrastructure, which is consistent with what other cities are aiming to do, what Fredericton does. So we've increased our pay-as-you-go in 2023 to $5.6 million. So in conclusion, we believe this budget reflects council's priorities. It certainly reflects improved financial health for the community. We also believe it reflects it starts to address council's wishes with respect to the 10-year strategic plan. And the recommendation is to reflect upon the proposed 2023 general operating budget and make any and all inquiries to staff and receive and follow this presentation. And again, the commissioners are available this afternoon to take any questions you have on any of the particular service areas. Thank you.
Thank you, CFO Fudge. To the committee, questions? Your worship, go ahead.
I just have a quick question, Kevin. When I gotta plug my phone in here. When I read on the first page with revenue, it says PILT adjustment. It doesn't show anything for 22, but it shows whatever it is, 65 for 23. What does that mean?
Yeah, so that's for the federal properties that are assessed. So what happens is the city receives around $1.5 million in payment in lieu of taxes for federal properties. Every year there's an adjustment. So that the actual $1.5 million is part of our property tax revenue. So it's in the $142 million line. But every year they provide us, they do an assessment and a review, and they do an adjustment of those properties. That's the PILT adjustment. We like to show that separately so that council is aware of what that is. That's just the adjustment to it. It's not the total property tax revenue we receive from those properties, just the annual adjustment. Okay, that's good. So the adjustment then is generated by them, and is it annually? It's annually, yeah. So last year it probably was probably a negative adjustment, not a positive adjustment, which is why you're not seeing it in the previous year. Right. Okay. Well, that's good. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Radwin?
Thank you, Chair. So I have one question through you to Commissioner Hamilton, if I can. I'm just wondering, I know that there is some funding in there for community development, senior officer. Just wondering if that is like citywide, or like would anybody from anyone all over the city be able to access this person, or can you reflect on that?
Yes, Chair
Good.
Sullivan, through you to the councillor. Certainly, as the CFO has indicated, there are 2 additional positions that are identified in the Growth and Community Services budget to support enhanced focus on community development. And that will include a senior manager for community support services, as well as a manager of community inclusion. And these are intended to support citywide programs related to community development, but really aligned with the strategic plan, seeing increased focus on social programming and other community support services.
Okay. Because I'm kind of wondering if they would end up taking a position almost like the kind of work that they would do in community centers. Like, are you able to kind of, we seem to be a little bit stuck over in the east side where we don't have somebody that people can access to figure out what services are available when it comes to like not-for-profit organizations and like where to direct people for grants and things like that. So would they be helping with anything like that?
Yeah, so these are city staff positions. They're not positions based in any of the community centers, so they would certainly be supporting the community at large. And a big part of the role would be obviously building relationships throughout the city, but certainly with our community partners, whether they're in East St. John or in other areas of the city.
So Chair, I mean, I have comments too. I don't know if you want me to wait.
Well, we do questions first, then we'll come through with comments. Just an FYI, Councillor Radwin, not sure if you're aware that your camera is sideways. You may be.
Told me that. I'm having all kinds of technology problems. I'm losing
that's right.
Juice. I can't seem to keep my tablet charged. So anyway.
Fair enough. That's
not sure
my day has been tech.
You know what? Maybe
Been a bad tech day too. Okay, thanks that you're aware. Questions, Councillor Norton or Councillor Reardon? Questions?
No, none here, Mr. Chairman. More commentary, but nothing at this time.
Okay. So I think we're finished with the questions. On to the comment round. So Councillor Radwin, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. So, you know, there's a lot of great things in this operating budget, obviously. I've made, you know, comments earlier and I stick by them on not reducing our tax rate or maybe looking at something a little bit differently. I know Councillor Harris had reached out to me earlier about this, and I'm in full agreement that it would be really nice to see, you know, what would be the difference if the rate did go down by 3 cents, or if it went down by 9 cents, or if it didn't go down at all. And I would love, and I think, you know, our residents need us to reduce the tax rate. However, by doing that, unfortunately, since heavy industry is in the same class, we are allowing the reduction there. Now, obviously, there's a multiplier, which if it's passed at 1.7, then we'll be able to utilize that. So that does offset things a little bit, but there's still a reduction there. And I feel like those kind of funds going back into investments in our asset management or in reserves, and CFO Fudge mentioned something that really got me, you know, thinking again after thinking last night. You know, we've had interest rates go up, we have our, you know, inflationary, like, it's just, the inflation's crazy. Of course, property assessments, we're still not, we don't have any control over them. It's been very unfair. And then the economists are pretty much all saying that they expect a recession. So what's coming? And, you know, when we're looking at this budget and we're going to be spending another almost $12 million because we've had such an increase, you know, it makes me wonder how much of that is sustainable. So I guess one thing that I'm going to be kind of looking for is to get, and I didn't want to ask the question, but I'd like to see it in the future, is like how much of that cost, that the expenditures, is actually like a one-time, like 1 year thing? And how much is it like a regular reoccurring operating cost? Because I am a little bit worried, as we have to be the fiscal stewards of the community. I am a little bit worried if we keep spending and spending that it's not going to be sustainable if we don't continue to have this tax base growth. Once you keep increasing these salaries and you keep increasing job positions, are we going to be able to sustain that? So, and I know this is a responsible budget. It's not that it's not, but it's just about what's going to happen in the future. And I know CFO Fudge would probably like me saying, like, we have to be careful we don't spend too much, right? So it's not about going crazy with the dollar and spending, but we have to be a little bit conservative. I end up looking at this, and first of all, I look at that Envision amount of $1.1 million more for Envision because we're having to keep our hotel levy there, which is totally unfair, unless Moncton and Fredericton are going to throw in their hotel levies as well. I want to be able to keep ours to use it as we see fit. And I mean, we did get into this agreement, but there's another agreement coming, and I want us to be able to utilize that as we see fit. And I always sit back and think, how can we make sure that the most vulnerable are looked after, right? Our working poor as well, right? And I end up thinking, is there more value in adding more funds with obviously some sort of expectation into community centers, right? Is it better for us to put more money into Pro Kids? Like, how can we uplift these members of our community? Is it better for us to invest in those capital costs? And Councillor Norton is always talking about recreation. Is it better for us to go and look after those fields now? Invest more in arenas now? So I don't really want to allow heavy industry to not have to pay that 1.71 tax rate. And I know we still have that multiplier. It's there, or it will be there, hopefully, if council passes it. But, we have to think about the long term. And I just feel like citizens have been subsidizing for so long that I want them to be able to reap the benefits of having as much tax money from heavy industry as possible. Anyway, that's everything for me, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Your Worship or Councillor Norton, comments?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, for me, there's lots of good slides in there. The debt service ratio for me is one of the things that I was particularly interested in to see how that's trended over time. And maybe it's a characteristic of previous councils I served on, but I always felt like that was a bit of a canary in the coal mine in terms of how we were doing as it relates to our financial health. So I guess to the commissioner, thanks for including that. It's moving in the right direction, and as we service less debt, I think we're starting to see that in better funding of some of those service areas. And for me, it's one of those. It's a really important slide for me. It's a small one. It's within a significant slide deck that has lots of good information. I'm looking forward to the rest of the commentary, whether it's from community that's hearing this tonight once it gets out for more public broadcast, or from our colleagues around the council table. But when you look at that debt service ratio for our community, that's great, and it provides a nice comparator. It's always difficult to compare, especially in finances, apples to apples, but at least the debt service ratio does that to a degree with other municipalities. And so good work by the team. So thank you. Thanks,
Councillor Norton. Councillor Reardon. Or Councillor
Thank you so much, Chair.
Mayor Reardon.
I'm good with it. I'm good with it all. I will piggyback on what Councillor Norton said, and it's a debt service ratio as well for me. Those are the things we have to do. And one thing I've known all along as I've been a councillor, you're never going to keep everyone happy. But I find like this budget sort of has everything in it. I don't know. It's so complex to align it with, our priorities and do what we have to do and get in there all of the issues that we want to see. But I feel like when I read through that, that is a very, to use our new word, uplifting budget for me. So I was very pleased with it, and I'm very, very supportive of it, very happy with it. And it's all, like I said, it contains all the things we have to do and so much about the things that we want to do. So appreciate your work, Kevin, and your team's work.
Thanks, Your Worship. Thanks, CFO Fudge. If I get a couple of slides I'd look at, because my favorite slide in the deck wasn't debt service ratio, though I like that one. My favorite slide in the deck was actually the residential increase comparator bar graph. Yeah, that one. So I'm a little competitive at heart. And, when I look at this, gosh, congratulations, Moncton. The residential tax base increase, it's certainly a financial reflection of the pressure that people want to live in an area, right? Like if there's more demand, then price goes up, and really this is what's showing it. So congratulations to Moncton. But if I'm in a race, oh my gosh, we are an arm's length behind Fredericton coming to the finish line. And how many years has it been since we were even with our regional partners? I think this is a brilliant regional that people are looking, and the pressure in St. John is the same as the pressure in Quispam and just a little bit ahead of Rothesay and Grand Bay, but really statistically we're all pretty even. We've been on the following side of that for a long time. So I think, looking at how people view the St. John region, that anywhere in the St. John region is a great place to live, work, and play. And when we get into the numbers and look at our residential side, just everybody involved in bringing newcomers into the city and retaining our talent, in having amenities so that people want to live here. Just great job to the St. John community. This one makes me happy. If you move one more, this one makes me less happy. So we need to have a conversation. When we have these numbers, we are right on par, and we are just behind Fredericton an arm's length. And if it was a race, this is stark. For Fredericton and Moncton to be pushing 10% and us at a third, little less than a third of 10%. Budgets, I think, not just in giving us how much we're planning to spend next year, but getting into these numbers also, I think, needs to move us into where does some of our focus come for next year. And folks in the city that work on helping to increase assessment on the non-residential side, obviously we've got some work to do. So some real things to celebrate on the residential side. And really motivation for me working with our team and anybody else in the city. We've got work to do on the non-residential tax base side. Thanks for the update on the targets. It is really, really important. That long-term financial plan is such a cornerstone for us. And we've got to keep checking the targets. Where are we? Where are we? Where are we? How are we doing? And I'm looking forward to us looking at the update and the update of those targets when we talk in Q1 next year. We've had such success by following the long-term financial plan. I would hate to say we've met some of our 2030 targets well, it'll be 2023 when we're talking about them. We shouldn't sit back, dust our hands off and sit back and say, we met the targets. We chose these targets for a reason, and they are leading us down a financially prosperous and sustainable path. So if targets need to be adjusted, we need to continue those conversations and continue the conversation on, okay, what should the targets be adjusted to? And that could go both ways, looking at a recession and where the economic indicators are at that time. Targets aren't static. Like any good long-term plan, we need to keep going back and tweaking and adjusting the plan. But really all good news. Everything's trending positively, and the fact that we have hit a few targets early, that is that much better. But we do need to do some work on those. I don't do this often, but I am gonna step into my Councillor Sullivan role as opposed to finance chair. And these are a few of my personal comments with regards to the budget and what we're seeing, particularly around the tax rate recommendation that's here. For me personally, I would love to see it go lower, but in all good conscience, and this does follow on Councillor Radwin's point, oh gosh, we got the multiplier wrong. I guess, we need more work on that, because it doesn't make sense that the residents are paying 6.3% more, where non-residential, commercial, and industry will actually be paying less taxes next year in property tax. And we've got but thankfully we've got good data to go back and have that conversation with the province. However, as much as, certainly my heart goes out to what we can do as a city to support our vulnerable. I think we have led the province in work in priority neighborhoods. We give sustainable funding to some neighborhood groups that, you talk to other levels of government about core funding and operational funding, and they don't go near it. It's all project and pilot. But we know it's important and one of our priorities, so we continue to give some operational core funding to some of our community groups. And I think it's smart financial investment, because they do a wonderful job of leveraging that money to actually get more bang for the buck to our residents. However, as much as we do care about and want to help our vulnerable, I am also very conscious of the residential homeowners who are paying the bills. In these inflationary times, reducing our tax rate is still giving them a 6.3% increase in their taxes. I don't know what the number would be, but if we don't reduce the tax rate, well, I'm assuming it'll be at that 10% cap. And, in all good conscience, I can't personally support a budget that is looking at taking more money from people who are already pressured, and they're the people who are writing the checks to the province for property tax that's getting moved to us to pay most of the bills. So I think the tax rate of $1.62, I wish we had more of a slider. I would love to really see the three classes that we have their overall increase be in the same ballpark. If it's going to be 6% for residents, it should be in the ballpark of 6% for non-residential, for the commercial and industrial. And if we could do that, likely it would be closer to 4 or 5% across the board. And so we do need that. So I'm glad we're sending that letter. But on the tax rate, where does this come from? The time to have discussions on what our priorities are is not when the bank account is open in front of you. When you know how much money you have to spend, it's not a matter of should we spend it all? This is where we get into trouble and go down a potential road of another structural deficit. This year we have money to spend. So we say, oh gosh, let's do more of this and let's do more of that, because we have the money next year to do it if we take all the money from our property tax. But then what happens the following year when things level off and it's no longer an 8% growth and we're back to something normal and a 3% growth, but we have hired all these people? That's when we get into structural deficit territory. So the time to talk about what new things to add is not when you're looking to maximize your credit card. I think our budget and what's been presented follows on the plans that we've created which get created not when the bank is open. You know, we say we had a great priority session as council as to what we wanted to focus on. You know, councils, we had a council adopt and another council affirm our long-term financial plan. I really appreciate staff's work in pulling information from all of those documents and our targets. And I know it was draft form, but the strategic plan, I know informed this budget. So though the strategic plan was a council conversation, was a community conversation, we have to stay focused. We have to stay disciplined. That's been our success. If the community and if council says, no, we want to shift our priorities and shift our direction, we need to have that as a comprehensive discussion of shifting direction. And really, that's not a message to staff at all, because I think staff have done exactly what we've asked them to do in bringing a budget forward that follows all of our plans. So I will hop down off my soapbox just in time for the city manager to wave at us. Mr. City Manager?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. One point we haven't highlighted in all the discussion this evening, and there's been so much outstanding presentation work by the finance team, but just by way of reminder, when we talk about the increased tax burden on residents, it's not just homeowners or property owners. It also applies to apartments. So the issue here is we have an affordable housing and a housing challenge, and we're going to solve that challenge in large part, not with single family homes, but with apartments and townhouses and multiplexes. By reducing the tax rate, we reduce the costs of those apartment buildings because they are not considered commercial, they are considered residential. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Mr. City Manager. The CFO reminded me of that a couple of weeks ago too. So yeah, that's incredibly important. So when we look at that, you know, $1.62 recommended tax rate, you know, we need to remember that the pressures, if that stays higher, that's more money that landlords have to pay, more pressure on prices and rents. I'm glad it's only a receive and file tonight, Mr. CFO.
I'm going to move that.
I'll move. Thank you, Your Worship. We got a seconder. People are blinking in and out.
I believe our chair is now frozen.
Where was I? All in favor, aye, before I froze? Any opposed? Councillor Radwin's opposed. Thank you, Councillor Radwin. I'm in favor, so it is carried. Sorry, just stopping my computer from the beeping in the background. And so that concludes the operating budget discussion for this evening, which takes us to item 6.3, which is the 2023 utility fund operating budget. Commissioner McGovern, over to you.
Good evening, Chairman Sullivan and members of Finance Committee. Just pull up the slide deck here. Everyone see that okay?
Yes, thank you.
Perfect. So the purpose of the presentation this evening is to present the draft 2023 utility operating budgets for both the potable water system and the industrial water systems. On November 14th, the plan is to have the budget before council for approval and first and second reading of the bylaw amendments. Third reading of the bylaw amendments would occur on November 28th. First, we'll present the potable budget and then transition to the industrial water budgets. So to get started, I'll touch on some of the key points of the potable water budget to provide some context. Despite fairly large cost increases in most areas, again this year, for the 5th straight year, there is no proposed increase for flat rate customers or metered customers. So the 2023 flat rate is again proposed to remain at the $1,428 per year. We have continued to stabilize rates through further significant cost reductions, allowing us to mitigate economic pressures. Regarding the debt reduction, we continue to aggressively pay down debt once again, and there's no new debt proposed for 2023. The last debt borrowing for the utility has been 6 years ago as part of the Safe Clean Drinking Water project. And budget includes wage escalation policy, despite that being a link to tax-based growth. So as you can see, the overall revenues and the matching expenditures are up 2.6%, despite holding the rate the same. So there is a bit of a growth in terms of water volume sales. That's where we're getting that, plus some additional revenue, which is an increase from the utility operating reserve for a one-time large expense at the Lancaster Lagoon. Other than that, the numbers are the same as last year. Potable flat rate units have been dropping over the years, as you can see on the graph here, but the good news is the rates have remained stable and no increase in the flat rate to homeowners. It is good to see that we've plateaued. We're starting to see a bit of growth in 2023 with flat rate units, and the growth is necessary to reduce pressure on rates and to further stabilize rates. So the good news once again here on this slide for metered consumption budget is that there's no increase in metered rates. This brings rate stability for commercial users in our business sector. Metered consumption had been on the decline. Consumption had been impacted by COVID-19, as we know, and as is shown here. And so businesses are recovering, and cruise ships are again, the last one I think today, filling up in our port on Great St. John water. So that's increasing our volume of sales and driving up revenue a bit. In terms of wages and benefits have seen a significant decrease in recent years. Wages and benefits in the utility have decreased by approximately $1.24 million, or 10.3% since 2020, despite the application of the wage escalation policy for 2023 of 5.35%. Another way to look at it is that year over year between 2022 and 2023, wages are going up 1.51%, despite the wage escalation and adjustments. So, with this, I can say that St. John Water is a lean operation now. I would also note that over the past year, we have commissioned new infrastructure, wastewater pumping stations, so the team is truly doing much more work with fewer people. Now, in terms of looking at the utility fund potable budget expenditures, the largest driver of goods and services expenditure increase in this budget is a one-time expense at the Lancaster Lagoon, a $750,000 expense. This one-time cost is not expected to reoccur again for a decade or more, and therefore it is recommended we transfer from the utility operating reserve just over $421,000 to offset this expenditure. All other inflationary increases have been mitigated through other savings. And in terms of growth that I mentioned earlier, it's important to put this in context around the growth and what it means for the utility. And I know we have touched on this in terms of what it means for the utility. So new tax base growth does not translate into the same level of revenue for the utility as it does for the general fund, which is challenging for utility revenues. If we take, for example, the new development known as the Wentworth, the estimated annual property tax for that building was around $230,000 annually. However, the estimated annual water and sewage revenue is about $30,000 annually, so about 13% of what the property tax revenue increase is. But if we look at the infrastructure deficit, the utility, according to our SODI report that we had presented just recently over the past few months, the utility infrastructure deficit is $247 million, and the general funds is in the order of $99 million. Yet the utility budget is, under $43 million, and the general fund for 2023 about $176 million. So the ability to pay is limited for these large infrastructure costs. But the good news is revenues are trending for 2023 with metered revenue increase of 4.3%. There is no new debt for 2023. As you can see on the graph here, we continue to pay down debt quickly. Debt will have reduced by 35.6% by the end of 2023 from the record high in 2017. That amounts to a $38.21 million debt pay down over approximately 6 years, so about $6.4 million per year that is being applied to the debt. We continue to secure large amounts of funding from other levels of government, which has allowed us to keep the capital from operating budget fairly consistent. And in 2023, we're putting nearly $4.9 million in capital, but leveraging $8.74 million, which is about 64% that we're leveraging of our capital budget. In terms of some of the 2023 utility potable budget initiatives, we plan to leak detect 33% of the east water distribution system to improve water system efficiency and reliability. We also plan to pilot the installation of 2 to 3 smart fire hydrants in 2023 in densely populated areas that will monitor water system pressures and monitor the system for leaks or the development of leaks. And the data captured will allow us to have better control of our water system and extend infrastructure life. We're also going to conduct fire hydrant inspections on 33% of the inventory and continue painting on the next 25% of our fire hydrant inventory. Continuing with initiatives in wastewater treatment, we'll be undertaking large-scale dredging of the Lancaster Lagoon in preparation for a large capital project that will get underway in 2023, and then also replacing of the biomedia filter, which is a picture on the top right at the Eastern Wastewater Treatment Facility. And in wastewater collection, we're increasing the funding and trenchless technology programs to complete more sanitary pipe repairs through pipe patching that allows us to extend the life of the asset while reducing the cost, so that it also reduces disturbance to citizens. And we're also planning on security upgrades at 3 of our large-scale wastewater treatment facilities with gates. So in terms of an overview, in terms of what we're doing for rate stabilization, again, we're holding or lowering a lot of costs either through staff reductions or continued focus on operational efficiencies. We're continuing to look for savings. Continuous improvement will be ongoing. We're not borrowing for capital, and we're continuing to focus on asset replacement as opposed to new assets, with most of the capital budget being focused on renewal. We continue to leverage every dollar we can, and in terms of capital from operating, and our engineering team has closed and will be tendering numerous capital projects this fall for 2023. So we're looking to make best use of ratepayer dollars there as well. In terms of asset management, we're extending the life of assets by, again, lining and pipe patching as opposed to replacing where that makes sense. And we continue to aggressively pay down the debt, focusing on increasing capital from operating as debt retires. We'll need to infill vacant lots, so that we get revenue increases without the burden of having to expand infrastructure. And we're looking to actively pursue revenue opportunity in the year ahead, and that's a focus of ours. And in 2023, we'll be working with continue working with the finance team to complete the long-term financial plan for the utility. And so that wraps up the potable component, and we'll just transition now to the industrial water rates for East and West. And so full separation of the potable and industrial system was achieved through the Safe Clean Drinking Water project. And in 2019, we started with this, and year over year we continue. A raw water rate analysis was completed again this year for East Industrial Water System and the West Industrial Water System. So industrial raw water rates are set annually for the four customers shown here on the screen, and each industrial water customer is billed the full cost of providing raw water to that specific industrial customer. Industrial raw water rates include operating costs, contributions to asset management or asset replacement, rate stabilization reserves, and debt, both new and historic or previous debt. The rate setting approach is based on industry best practices that focuses on three main categories to calculate the industrial water rates consumption charge, which is the full recovery of operating costs, fiscal services debt, contributions to asset management. And as you can see, costs have risen, and that's attributed to investments in the infrastructure in 2023 that are necessary. So the 2023 East raw water consumption rates are presented on the screen. The East industrial water costs are divided between Irving Oil and Irving Paper based on the volume used in the previous years by each industrial customer, and services are specific to each industrial customer. And the four components of the operating cost are the operating costs, the fiscal servicing of debt, asset management, and the rate stabilization contributions. The consumption charges for the Irving Oil rate being 0.2834 cents per cubic meter, and this is driven in large part by our plan to install flow meters on transmission mains, or new flow meters on the transmission mains servicing that customer. And for Irving Paper, they experienced substantial reduction in water usage given the volume, and given the volume dropped, the rate is being adjusted to reflect that reduction in volume to 0.089 cents per cubic meter. For 2023, for the West industrial raw water consumption rates that are calculated in the same way, in this case, the West industrial customers are divided between Irving Pulp and Paper and NB Power Coulson Cove based on the volumetric usage of those in each of the previous years by each industrial customer, and the services are specific to that customer. And the rate for IPP for 2023 is 0.0816 cents per cubic meter, given the consumption reduction and the increase in operational costs for 2023 associated with planned maintenance work on the infrastructure servicing that customer. And for NB Power, the rate is being adjusted, recommended to be adjusted to 0.9199 cents per cubic meter as a result of reduced consumption and planned work at the screening building that services that customer. So in conclusion, the utility has continued to be aggressive in terms of cutting costs, finding efficiencies and managing the assets over the last 5 years. We've stabilized rates over the 5-year period, and this year, despite the significant increases in electricity, chemicals, wages that we've seen. And so, and we've done that through again, the reduction in staff and efficiency gains. But there is a risk that we can't continue to balance those increases through reduction in costs. So not unlike the general fund utility is very similar. We do need the growth to continue through infills, as I say, because we don't want to expand the infrastructure footprint. The good news, though, is that we do have large infrastructure. We have it in place. We have the ability for growth, and so we do have what would be considered by other communities large infrastructure costs to be put in place. We have that in place, and so we're ready for growth. We have the backbone and the infrastructure in place to allow for that community growth. And lastly, it's recommended that Finance Committee approve the proposed 2023 utility fund operating budget and forward it to the next meeting of Common Council for approval and first and second reading of the water and sewage bylaw amendments. And with that, Chairman Sullivan, I'll turn it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner McGovern. Questions on the utility budget? Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to Commissioner McGovern. There's always a lot of questions that come up about water meters and being fair and equitable, and I realize that I always seem to forget, but it's not something that we're able to fund from our operating budget. So just wondering if you could speak to when our debt is going to be paid and when we would be able to have, when are you projecting that we would end up being able to install meters for everyone?
Yes, so thank you for that, through you, Chairman Sullivan. To Councillor Radwan. There's, I guess, a number of things there. So the, sorry, I'm getting some feedback. The concept of universal metering is something that's in our 10-year strategic plan that was adopted just this week. So it is a focus to look at that further. Also, as part of the utility long-term financial plan that we intend to bring back in early 2023 or in first quarter 2023. We will look at that and lay out a framework around when the debt drops off and when it makes sense to bring on that so that there isn't the cost burden. You are correct in terms of it's not an operating cost per se. It's more of a capital cost, and it is fairly cost intensive, but then it does add, in addition to the capital, it adds to recurring operating costs. So we want to be mindful of that and strategic in terms of recommendations that are made so that we can implement universal metering without placing that upward pressure on rates. So it folds into the longer term financial plan seamlessly.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Councillor Radwan. Just before I go to the others, I'm going to pile on that. Thank you for asking that question, Councillor. Yes, I will make the point Commissioner McGovern has heard me make before, but we now have curbside recycling, which one of the lagging communities to finally do that. I don't know of any other community that is still doing flat rate water, and I think it is incredibly unequitable for the person who is living in their own house by themselves to be paying the same water rate as a multiple family who happens to have a swimming pool in their backyard. So the sooner we can get, but I will say, I really, really appreciate zero increase again, especially we're just coming off the conversation about, a 6.3% increase for residential homeowners potentially in the operational budget. So the good news for the city of St. John is because of the good financial stewardship with utility that we can look at a 0% increase. But I'm with Councillor Radwin, and I know it speaks in our strategic plan. I was excited to see that in our overall city strategic plan, that we are going to continue to look at this and move towards universal metering. So thank you for that. Your worship or Councillor Norton, any questions on the utility budget?
Nothing here, Mr. Chairman, other than the fact that I am obviously not only as a ratepayer myself, but you can't help but hear the feedback from constituents and those that you represent when they do get those bills. You're right. There still remains. It's still one of those things that remains a lot of sticker shock with it, and it's one of the things that does not make us as competitive as some other outlying areas, or those that would not have as significant a water and sewage bill as we do. However, we have a much more reliable system, and water is a resource that does cost to treat and deliver, and whether it's the terrain that we deliver it on or the infrastructure that we've invested in, I think the next step to build equity into it is exactly like you said, is for the metering component, whether that's a phased in or pilot project approach that sends a message that we're looking at it similar to the curbside recycling, where we sort of beta tested it in a select neighborhood and had feedback after a billing period about what that exactly looks like. Our phased in approach over a number of years. I look forward to that time.
Thanks, Councillor. Your worship, any questions?
No questions, but I'll move the recommendation.
Thank you. A seconder?
Seconder.
Thank you, Councillor Radwin. I do have a question, actually, Commissioner McGovern. Do we still bill if we have our infrastructure going by a house, but they are on their own well and septic and don't choose to hook up? We used to charge. Do we still charge?
Correct. We still charge. Yeah, either for, depending upon if it's water or sewer or a combination of both, they do get billed.
Thank you. I thought we did. Do we send that same charge to an empty house? Like if there's a building that doesn't have anybody living in it, do we still send that charge if they might be hooked up but not using?
Yeah, good question. So we did look into that, and unfortunately, we don't have the legislative authority to bill unless there is a building standing on the land. So it's something that is we've identified to pursue. We have added it into one of the 90-some actions within the strategic plan. And so it is something to be pursued in terms of a legislative change so that we can get that additional revenue for a piece of land that the infrastructure goes by that is not yet developed.
Okay, so not yet developed, but so if there's, let's say there's a building that is on the list of our dangerous and vacant buildings, would it get a water charge?
It does. That's an amendment we made to the bylaw so that as long as the building is standing until such time as it's torn down, it still gets a water charge or sewer charge, and if it's not paid, we can levy the charge against the property.
Good. No, I appreciate that, especially for the vacant and dilapidated buildings. It financial pressure to get something done with the building. And I think if we can move along to the empty lots to motivate some people to do something with those as well, because all of that is, not just, really, I'm not looking at this through a financial lens to get more money for the utility, which is always good. Really, I'm looking at it as financial pressure to have people develop and get more housing built. So no, thank you for that. I appreciate the responses. I do have the motion is on the floor. I'll call the question. All in favor signify with aye. Contrary minded? Carried. And just before we sign off, thank you for the very, very robust conversation and the research of staff. The information presented was a lot, and a lot of math, a lot of spreadsheets, a lot of information for the community to digest. I think really important, though, that the community have a look at how the tax assessment is all working, because that's a tough mathy conversation. The information we received on the unconditional grant, I think, is important, and that especially that change that the core funding is now being seen differently, because that does affect how we move forward. Most importantly, well, I guess I'll hit the water rates again. 0 increase for residential customers for the 5th year in a row. Thank you for that, as we have heard look to the future and hopefully universal metering. And finally, the conversation has officially started on our operational budget. We heard a few different viewpoints tonight, which is good. If we have groupthink and everybody's going down the same path, my red flags go up that we must be doing something wrong. This is an important community conversation that starts tonight. So for those at home, make sure if you have questions, feel free to reach out and ask. If you have comments, feel free to reach out and give them. St. John's great at giving comments and your opinions. We're looking for them here. And I'm looking forward to the conversation over the next month as we continue. The good news is that we are in a position in the city of St. John to have this conversation, where it's so nice to be saying, do we cut our tax rate or do we provide more services? It's been a few years now since we've had to think we have to find a $10 million structural deficit. We are so far moving forward. These are important conversations, but they're really good to be able to have. So with that, I'll finish up and look for a motion to adjourn. Thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Radwin, I'll take you as a seconder. I've got Councillor Norton's icon up here. Thanks for tonight. Thank you to staff, all the staff who were standing by to answer questions we didn't have, but that's because of the comprehensive work you had in your presentations. To our finance team, wonderful job. And it'll be our job as your finance committee over the next few days to translate some of that into English for the rest of the city. Have a great night, everybody. Thank you. We are adjourned.